With the season of discovery for Classic World of Warcraft almost upon us, players are united in their eagerness to explore old Azeroth once again, in search of new secrets. An initial level cap of 25 will completely change the early endgame, with a focus placed on the new 10-man raid version of the classic Blackfathom Deeps dungeon. And whilst I may very well tell the tale of that murky subterranean temple one day, there are more instances at level 25 than just BFD. Indeed, the subject of today's video is one of the very best dungeons in the entirety of Classic WoW, and it just so happens to be one of my personal favourites too. My name is Vulgrin, and I invite you to join me, my friends, as we explore the cobwebbed halls and mist-wreathed ramparts of Shadowfang Keep. Vanilla World of Warcraft is blessed with a wide range of dungeons with varied themes which reflect the true size of the game world. One minute you're delving through an irradiated underground city, the next you're exploring the thorny den of a Quillbore tribe. There really is no end to the creativity on display, at least when it comes to the lore and visuals of these dungeons. However, despite this variety, most of the early instances in WoW generally tend to fall into one of two categories. You have cave dungeons like Ragefire Chasm and the Wailing Caverns, and you have basement type dungeons like the Stockades or Gnomeregan. What binds these two categories of dungeon together is that they are self-contained indoor environments. The dungeon swallows you up, and for a time you completely forget that there even is an outside world beyond the instance. There is, however, a third type of dungeon. These instances combine outdoor and indoor environments and offer players a greater deal of perspective as they delve into the hearts of ancient ruins and burning cities. Personally, I find this third kind of dungeon to be much more enjoyable. Instances like Dire Maul, Moradon and Stratholme are a real feast for the eyes and leave you in no doubt that you are exploring a place that actually exists in the game world. This design approach would also become much more commonplace with future expansions, with a good example being the very first Burning Crusade dungeon, Hellfire Ramparts, which would see players forging a path along the high wall of an orcish fortress, looking out over the Hellfire Peninsula which surrounded them. Unfortunately, either due to technical limitations or possibly even because the devs wanted to save the really engaging instances for later in the game, there are very few examples of this type of dungeon in the first half of Vanilla. But there is one true exception. Perched like a grey wolf among the hills overlooking the road through Silverpine Forest, Shadowfang Keep is every bit as predatory as the terrifying beasts which stalk its halls. Adventurers brave or foolish enough to climb the winding road leading to its decrepit gate are seldom seen again, and the howls of unspeakable night things ring out across a land bathed in the light of the full moon. To understand the undying appeal of Shadowfang Keep, we must first examine its origins, and as with all things in the northern eastern kingdoms, these origins concern the plague of undeath and its devastating consequences. That this mighty fortress had long been a bastion of strength and power for those who held it seems above question, situated as it was on the main road running north-south from the capital city of Lordaeron towards the kingdom of Gilneas. One can imagine weary travellers turning their eyes to the cloudy heavens and witnessing the great stone ramparts looming over them, dominating the surrounding pine forests. It is perhaps a testament to the reputation of the castle, which would in time be known as Shadowfang Keep, that it belonged to the kingdom of Gilneas, despite being so far from Gilneas city and even beyond the colossal Greymane Wall that was built to protect that kingdom from the threat of the Scourge. At the time that the wall was being constructed, and Gilneas withdrew from the Alliance to fester in an uneasy period of isolation and civil strife, Shadowfang Keep was held by the Silverlane family. The foremost of the Silverlanes carried the noble title of Baron, and whilst we can only speculate on their origins, one gets the impression of a hereditary noble family who had proudly held the keep for generations. We can only imagine how it must have felt for these nobles as they observed the construction of the Greymane Wall, its monolithic edifice rising day by day, stone by stone, and with it the knowledge that Shadowfang Keep, its lands, its common folk, and the Silverlanes themselves had been left on the wrong side. From his dialogue inside the instance, we are given the impression that the last Baron was a dutiful man who cared for the fates of others. When first engaged by players, he implores them to leave the accursed keep, and upon slaying a player, he prays that their soul will find solace, something which he was denied. Such a principled man doubtless expected to hold Shadowfang Keep against the Scourge and to fall with his kinsfolk in a heroic last stand. After all, why would he allow himself and his family to remain within sight of the Great Wall and not take the ample opportunity to escape with their lives? Honour and duty, this, I think, is the answer. Sadly, the doom of the Silverlane family would not be so noble, and it would not come at the hands of the Scourge, but by the hubris of a fellow Gilnean. The story of Archmage Arugal is shrouded in conflicting accounts of a man who to some was little more than a charlatan masquerading as a great wizard, but who required the aid of enchanted objects to supplement his weak magic. But to others, Arugal was a mighty figure, for despite the scorn of contemporaries like Dalar Dawnweaver, he was nonetheless held in high honour and accounted a royal court wizard in Gilneas City. Whatever his origins may have been, Arugal appears to have been distinguished less by his magical abilities and more by his ambition and his recklessness. When the Scourge began to sweep down through Lordaeron, and the lords of Gilneas looked to the north with fear and alarm, all eyes turned to the border of the realm, and the minds of great men were set to work devising myriad solutions so that the kingdom would be defended. Smaller and weaker than Lordaeron as Gilneas may have been, the fact that its people had the time to prepare for the Scourge advance and would not be taken by surprise was a great advantage. At the behest of King Gen Greymane, Arugal too sought a solution. Whether he did so more for his own advancement or for the good of Gilneas, we will never know. But what is known is that he had studied the works of the Kirintor wizard known as Ur, whose research on shadow magic and the strange lupine creatures known as the Worgen would lead Arugal to devise his own plan to tackle the Scourge threat. He approached King Gen and shared some of what he had learned regarding the Worgen and how they could be summoned to defend Gilneas against the Scourge. Though Arugal is said to have warned the king about the wild ferocity of the Worgen, it is hard to believe that he did not intend for Greymane to accept his offer, having gone so far as to propose it to his liege in the first place. And Gen would take Arugal up on his proposal, desperate as he was to hold back the seemingly unstoppable tide of the undead. And so the wizard set to work, summoning the Worgen to hold the Greymane wall and prevent the Scourge from breaking through at all costs. And it worked. The powerful Worgen, monstrous creatures larger than a man and physically superior in every conceivable way, tore through the shambling hordes of undead until there was nothing left to kill. Well, apart from the Gilnean soldiers left defending the wall, that is. And so the kingdom began to pay the awful price for the devil's bargain it had struck, and Arugal's folly was finally laid bare. If he had possessed a fathom of Ur's wisdom as well as his thirst for knowledge, Arugal would have realised that the force he had unleashed could never truly be controlled. The Worgen, rage-fueled and bloodthirsty to the core, set about slaughtering their erstwhile comrades, ranging through the dark forests of Silverpine and spreading chaos in their wake. Perhaps, on its own, this would not have been so great a concern for the High Lords of Gilneas, protected as they were behind the Greymane wall. Some might even whisper in dark corridors and closeted chambers that the creation of such a buffer, a no-man's land inhabited only by the feral beast, would be of use to the kingdom in the long run. But of course, they only reckoned with half the problem. The true curse of the Worgen was that those who survived their onslaught would in time turn into the very beasts they had fought against. The Gilneans now faced the prospect of a second plague every bit as deadly as the Scourge. In the ensuing chaos and bloodshed that followed, as the Worgen multiplied and spread across Silverpine, Shadowfang Keep stood, as grey and implacable as ever, but with no one left to fight. It was only a matter of time before the Wolfmen converged on the castle. Baron Silverlane would get his heroic last stand, but this was no noble defence of his home, fighting to the last in some brave rearguard action to protect Gilneas. Instead, he and his family would be slaughtered, likely by the now monstrous forms of those he had once sworn to protect. And watching on in abject horror was the man who had started it all, for in a final cruel twist of fate, Aragorn found that the Worgen whom he had created and brought into Silverpine viewed him as some crooked father figure, not only sparing, but serving him as their lord. As the last cries died and the blood pooled in the castle, Aragorn took up his seat of power, the new Dark Lord of what would soon become known as Shadowfang Keep. Let me ask you, dear viewer, does it get much better than this? You've got all the elements of great design. I feel like I'm describing an area in a Dark Souls game, honestly. And I get the feeling that the developers who worked on Shadowfang Keep must have surely fallen deeper under its spell, because the level of visual detail in this instance is absolutely worthy of its incredible lore. But before we move on to discussing the dungeon itself and how it feels to play, let me take a moment to engage in some shameless self-marketing, because I've started streaming here on YouTube. I hope to one day make a living from making content like this, and streaming is a big part of that vision. I may one day take the streams to Twitch, but for now I'm doing them all on YouTube, and I'll be playing Season of Discovery live pretty much from launch. I don't have a fixed schedule, but my streams typically go live between 6 and 7 PM UK time, so you should have some forewarning before the stream starts. I would really appreciate it if you would hop into one of the streams at some point if you get the opportunity. But for now, back to the video. I once described Shadowfang Keep as being a mini Karazhan, and I think that that's a fair description, because this dungeon is the true haunted castle of WoW. Imagine lifting a setting straight out of an episode of Scooby-Doo, and you get the picture. Upon crossing the drawbridge and passing beneath the menacing portcullis, you find yourself in the heart of a gothic masterpiece, complete with ghosts, fell steeds, werewolves, and even an evil wizard orchestrating it all. But it's not just these gothic themes which tie SFK to Kara, it's also an attention to detail that both these beloved instances share, and in the case of Shadowfang Keep, this level of detail far exceeds what you find in other dungeons at this level. What I think makes Shadowfang Keep so amazing is just how much the devs managed to pack into what is a fairly small area. You start in the gateway of the castle, but let's rewind a moment, because the entrance to the instance itself is a work of art. You climb a long, winding road which leads to a drawbridge, leaving you face to face with a silent grey fortress. Unlike other dungeons such as the equally famous Dead Mines, you don't fight your way through a horde of enemies to enter SFK. On the contrary, the entrance is eerily quiet. The castle dares you to cross that drawbridge and face what lies within, if you're brave enough. In short, you're not the one in control here. This is not an adventure, it's a horror story. The clever design continues the moment you step inside the instance. You find yourself first in the gateway, able to look out through the closed inner gate into the courtyard where Worgen prowl and stalk the shadows. This helps build tension and anticipation of the battle to come. Use of perspective like this to allow players the opportunity to anticipate the encounters they'll face as they progress through the dungeon is great level design. The devs also employed some interesting tricks to compartmentalize different sections of the dungeon. A side door leads you off from the gatehouse into a stable type area where you first encounter the Worgen. But it's only by fighting through this section into an adjoining dungeon area that you can escape this part of the castle and enter the courtyard, as you need to free a faction-specific NPC who will unlock the exit door for you. What follows is a subtle yet impactful dance as the dungeon leads you from indoor to outdoor areas and then back inside again. Unlike other dungeons, you never feel like you're stuck inside too long in Shadowfang Keep, because once you clear out the kitchens and Great Hall on the far side of the courtyard, defeating the ghost of Baron Silverlane in the process, you eventually work your way up onto the ramparts of the castle. The whole experience of running Shadowfang Keep, from the moment you zone into the instance, right through to that climactic final encounter with Aragorn in the ruined tower, reminds me of another similar experience in a different game. The ascent of Lothric Castle in Dark Souls 3, albeit much grander in scale than Shadowfang, is another great example of how vertical level design helps evoke feelings of progress and achievement in the player. you work your way through different segments of the fortress, fighting bosses here and there, and exploring sections of the citadel which have their own specific themes within the overarching story of the castle you're gradually moving upward through. Being able to look up and see where you're going, but then also look down and understand how far you've come, reminds you of what you've accomplished, but also what is at stake should you fail. It's the combination of vertical level design and intricate detailed areas which makes SFK stand out so much for me in contrast to other early dungeons in World of Warcraft. I would challenge anyone to find a part of the instance that feels extraneous or poorly developed. Everything has its place in the story of the dungeon, and the way these segments flow together seamlessly is a testament to how well crafted the experience is. But with that being said, we are entering the age of discovery after all, and with the new season placing a focus on putting a new twist on old content, I can't help but speculate as to what a Shadowfang Keep raid would look like. So here goes. I would place the entrance to the instance not at the castle drawbridge, but far below at the gate into Pyrewood Village. This accursed settlement is populated by humans by day, but the night reveals them for the worgen they truly are, led by a council who serve Aragol, so where better to begin the adventure? Players would have to locate a human NPC somewhere inside the village, but be warned, interacting with the NPCs will reveal their true worgen forms, and you'll have to fight your way through. I can imagine that this NPC, once found, would lead your party to a secret locked gate, the entrance to a tunnel which would take you up through the hillside, eventually emerging in a cell within the castle dungeons, much like a reversal of the opening sequence of Oblivion. A boss located somewhere within the dungeon would be excellent and leave the opportunity for a bit of a wildcard encounter. Who knows what strange folk Aragol might be keeping down in the depths of his keep? A crazed member of the Scarlet Crusade perhaps, or a rogue Kirintor wizard from the nearby settlement of Ambermill. Personally, what I would love to see here would be a captured Death Knight, imprisoned from the days of the Scourge. That would certainly add some extra spice to this haunted castle dungeon. That's just one idea from me that I think would work well if we were to ever get an expanded Shadowfang Keep raid instance, but I'm sure several of you have your own thoughts on what would work. If so, let me know in the comments. Some of the suggestions I've seen over the last weeks in relation to Season of Discovery have been truly amazing, so I look forward to hearing your ideas. Like many of you, I've run the Shadowfang Keep dungeon countless times. It is, after all, one of the first instances you encounter, especially as a Horde player. But no matter how often I find myself back in the cold embrace of this castle, it still reminds me that vanilla WoW is home to some truly exceptional game design. The vertical approach to the instance, with the attention to detail found in every room, speaks to the loving care and craftsmanship that once typified World of Warcraft. I cannot wait to return to this dungeon in a week's time when Season of Discovery is released. I just hope that the devs learn from this sort of content when planning their future level up raids and whatever other new content they have in store. I guess we'll have to just wait and see. For now though, let me thank you all for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did and you'd like to see more, I'll be covering other instances in Classic over the coming weeks, as well as streaming Season of Discovery when it's released, so feel free to stick around for that. Let me know what you think of SFK, what additions you'd make for it, and if there are other dungeons that you prefer in vanilla. I always read the comments and respond whenever I can. But that's where I'll leave it for today, my friends. I've been Vulgrin, thanks again for stopping by, and I shall see you in the next video. Bye-bye!